Hello everyone and welcome to this video. In this video I wanted to introduce the current Croatian number one player Saric Ivan by analyzing one of his chess games. And I chose this game he played against the Czech Grandmaster David Navara in the European Individual Chess Championship in 2011. So one might ask the reasonable question why I chose this specific game and why I didn't choose some of his more famous games, for instance the game against Magnus Carlsen at the Norway Chess Olympiad in 2014 where Saric beat the world champion. But I didn't quite like that game because of the fact that Magnus Carlsen didn't play his best chess there and it was extremely one-sided and predictable game. Not wishing to belittle the triumph of Saric, but I think it wasn't of the highest quality, at least from the world champion's viewpoint. And so I chose this game because it is extremely rich in chess content and extremely interesting and extremely fighting. And it's a win against a player from the highest level. And so, yeah. And I will skip the introduction of the players this time. I just mentioned that Navara David is the current Czech number one, and he was the Czech number one for quite some time. And Saric Ivan is the Croatian Grandmaster, the highest rated Croatian Grandmaster, and he gained some prominence by winning the Tata Steel Chess Tournament in 2014 and playing in the A group in 2015, although in the A group he didn't perform particularly well. Yeah, but okay. So let's look at the game. The game started as the Spanish opening, or as it is called the Ruy Lopez, characterized by this move bishop b5. We will look this game from the black's viewpoint since Saric played the black pieces. And he played the fashionable move a6, and after bishop the oldly fashionable move a6, nowadays knight f6, going for the famous Berlin endgame is kind of more popular. Okay, but a6, and now after bishop a4, avoiding the exchange variation, knight f6, castle short, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3. We've reached the standard closed Ruy Lopez position, and black played here move d6. He can also start with the castles, and that is kind of invitation to the variation called the Marshall attack, characterized by move c3, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes e5, which includes a pawn sacrifice, but after knight takes d5, rook takes e5, c6, black has a reasonable compensation for it, and in this variation there is an enormous amount of theory, and going into that would require a specific video or probably even more videos. For those interested, you can check that for yourself. I think that Peter Leko and Levan Aronian are the grandmasters who play this variation quite regularly. Yeah, but okay. And of course, white, if he doesn't want to enter Marshall, he can avoid it with numerous moves such as h3, such as a4, etc, etc. Okay, so d6 avoids this possibility of Marshall attack and turns the game toward normal Spanish territory. And after the further move c3, castle short, h3, we've reached the standard tabia of the closed Ruy Lopez, and here black has numerous possibilities. The old main line, which is somewhat not that fashionable today, is knight a5, and after bishop c2, c5, in order to expand on the queen side as fast as possible and somewhat hinder the break d4. There is also quite some theory there. And also in the old days there was this, among other things, there was this h6 variation. I think it was Vasily Smyslov who introduced this. And of course there are numerous moves. There is knight b8, there is knight d7, knight d7 followed by bishop f6 and some knight c5 ideas. Yeah, okay, there are a lot of possibilities here. But the black played the move bishop b7. This is the so-called Zaitsev variation, named after its innovator Igor Zaitsev. Igor Zaitsev was a Russian grandmaster, and he was famous for his unorthodox approach to the openings, and he is the author of many famous novelties during the pre-computer era. Okay, and so d4 is the logical move, and here rook e8. And the point of this variation is that black focuses on development and tries to go without the move h6, which once thought for which it was thought that it was customary in the past. So black continues development. We can see here the point of the variation, and the whole idea of the variation is to meet the move knight g5 with the rook f8. And the logical follow-up to knight g5 is f4. Today knight f3 and rook e8 is the way to test black or to reach a quick draw. So yeah, logical follow-up is f4, which looks threatening, but Igor Zaitsev discovered that after he takes f4, bishop takes f4, knight a5, bishop c2, there is this move knight d5, attacking the bishop and a covering attack on the knight. And there is some theory possibility of white playing this position, for instance queen h5, h6, e takes d5, bishop takes g5, and now knight d5, and of course if black takes the bishop on f4, there is this variation queen f5, g6, because the mate is threatened on h7. Black is forced to go g6 and queen takes f4, and white kind of has compensation for the pawn here, but I think it's not that dangerous for black, and the highest of white hopes is to reach an equal position or that it's in equilibrium. Yeah, so not some variation for white. I think he should drift for more in the opening. So he played the move knight bd2, continuing his development, and black removed his bishop to f8. That is a standard Spanish idea in order to put the bishop on g7 and in order to have more influence in the center. And here white played a3. I think the main move is a4, and that is also the standard Spanish move, undermining the structure on the queen side and attacking this b pawn. Okay, but a3 also has some logic, and it introduces somewhat slower game. And here black finally decided on h6, which is somewhat a semi-waiting move, because if black goes, for instance, g6, then after bishop c2, bishop g7, he has removed his bishop from this diagonal, and white can exploit that by playing the move knight b3. And here black would ideally want to play d5, which is, I was once taught as a kid, or I've read somewhere, that once black has played d5 in any kind of open game, he has equalized, but here it is not the case, since white has a very unpleasant move knight c5, and he is better in this position because this bishop is really important. If black goes bishop c8, it really hinders his development, and he is clearly worse. Okay, so h6, still a very useful move, and kind of semi-waiting move, trying to see what white will do. And white decided to close the center with d5. I am not a great fan of this move in the Ruy Lopez, because after this move both f5 advance and both c6 advance are valid plans for black. I think that black could have played something like bishop c2, and then after queen d7, the standard Spanish maneuver knight f1, going with the knight either on g3, either on e3. He could have gone then g6 and bishop d2, bishop g7, and we would have a classic Spanish struggle here, but in which white has some chances. Yeah, okay. But he played d5, and after knight e7 he played another standard Spanish maneuver, knight h2, going for the knight g4, and as we will see in the game, these double g pawns are actually not a weakness, but once the pawn on g4 goes to g5, it creates some threats on the black king side, on the king side of the board in general. Okay, and here black played another developing move, queen d7. He could have played, for instance, knight d7 in order to remove this knight from the g4 square and heading to c5, and after some continuation knight g5, he could have played knight c5, bishop c2, and this standard idea c6, undermining the white center, and if well, there is this approximate variation b4, knight goes back, and c4, and here after rook c8 position will be quite complicated, and there is typical Spanish struggle in prospect with chances for both sides, I would say. Okay, immediate c6 is also possible, but it's not that good because after white takes and black recaptures with the knight, there is this knight g4 move, and after this knight is exchanged, black's control of d5 is somewhat weakened, and as we will see in some variations, after black takes and goes knight a5, white can go, for instance, bishop d5, and there is no knight c4 move since knight is here on d2 controlling this square. Okay, so this is kind of wait and see game in which both sides are waiting for the other side to say their intentions. And okay, black played queen d7, and white went knight d f1. I think that this move is, okay, it's hard to say a mistake, but somewhat inaccurate, because if white should have, in my opinion, continued his plan with knight g4, and after black takes, there is no better move, I think, and here captures, and if white goes c6 here, there is again d6, d takes c6, knight takes c6, and a4, and if here knight a5, there is again this move bishop d5, and there is again no jump of the knight to the c4, and black is worse here. He should do something else, for instance, knight g6, knight f1, and here white has a pleasant position, I think, after he has hindered c6 timely. Okay, but knight f1 also not that bad. But here black played c6, and white now played knight g4, and we will see that now white has created himself a weakness on d5. If white goes d takes c6 here, after knight takes c6, knight g4, and after black takes on g4, now there is the possibility of knight a5, and after bishop d5, there is this move knight c4, which is now possible since white knight has departed from d2. And of course, if white removes the bishop to c2, now there is this advanced d5, and I think black has solved all his problems, and he cannot be worse here. Okay. But white played knight g4, and after black took on g4, he also took on d5. And here we see that white is forced, okay, not forced, but the best move here is to take with the pawn. If he takes with the bishop, then black can take, for instance, with the knight, and this pawn is permanent weakness, and black has two bishops with a very pleasant position, I think. Okay, so he took with the pawn, somewhat hindering black's pieces, and black played his rook on the open file, and which also creates an interesting positional threat. Okay, not threat, but interesting idea behind this move in particular, which was played in the game, I think. And here white played knight g4, trying to reach f5 or just to activate this knight on e4 or somewhere. And I think a4 was the standard Spanish move, was also possible here, as after, for say, knight g6, now knight g3, and it is kind of semi-waiting move, because black's pieces are all very well placed, but he doesn't have a logical continuation now, so this is another useful move, also waiting for black to declare his intention. And for instance, if black removes the knight, now he has removed the attack from d5, and now white can play knight g3, also threatening to jump on f5, and now there is no this idea which was played in the game rook c4, because white can simply take, and d5 pawn is not threatened. Of course, the knight g6 is probably not the best move, but it is hard to suggest what black should play here. I don't know, he can play for a g6 or something, but it's then white could take on b5 and gain the a file. Okay, so I think after a4 white would be better and have a pleasant position. So after knight g3, it also looks quite strong, activating the knight. But there is this amazing idea which black had foreseen much earlier with the rook c4. And this is the position of exchange sacrifice, and I think that Tigran Petrosyan would be very proud of this move. He was the world champion and the player who was famous for positional exchange sacrifices. And the point is that this move attacks the pawn on g4, and white has a choice. He cannot choose not to take on c4. But if he plays g5, h5, bishop g5, then after some move like rook g4, bishop c1, f5, he gets quite a pleasant position. Also, again, here knight d5 is perfectly possible, sacrificing exchange again. Okay, so I think the most principled continuation for white is to take this exchange on c4, and white recaptures. And what has black gained in return for his exchange? Well, for one thing, this b pawn is kind of backward, so he has a target to attack. Also, d5 pawn is falling, and white's rooks don't have many open files on which to operate. And also this g4 pawn is really weak, so yeah, black has very good compensation for the exchange, and I think it was a very interesting move by Saric. Okay, so here white has many possibilities. Out of all, I will mention merely that further development by bishop e3, knight d4, and something like f3 is followed by taking on e3 and d5 advance when black has very threatening center. Also, he's threatening bishop c5, and I think actually black is even better here. Also, b3 here was possible, trying to undermine the structure, but after rook c8, bishop b takes c4, rook takes c4, we can see here that d pawn is falling all the same, and black has excellent compensation for the exchange here. White played b4, trying to advance this pawn, also exploiting his pawn majority, since in the future he can create the post pawn on by a4 and b5, and he will have a post pawn for the endgame, and also he can now develop his bishop without being worried by attack on b2 and some pressure down the b file. Okay, so b4, I think the computer also agrees that this is the best move in the given position, and black took on d5. Here, white played the move knight e4, bringing the knight to center. He could have continued the development by bishop d2, and then after knight c7, knight e5, again d5. Black has excellent compensation for the pawn, but I think, okay, the position is, as they say, in the state of dynamic equilibrium. Okay, so black played knight e4, while white played knight e4, and here black went somewhat astray by the move h5. I don't know why he did that. If he wanted to play queen c6, why not to do so immediately? And then f3, bishop s7, black has reasonable position. So he played h5, and I don't know if he was better. He was hoping for white to be greedy, to take on h5, and then he can play f5, knight g3, knight takes c3. But even here, after queen c2, queen c6 threatening mate on g2, f3, f4, queen takes c3, f takes g3. Here white is quite okay, I think even better now, since black has given up this pawn on h5 for free practically. Yeah, okay. And black played this move g5, and we can see here now that this pawn is hanging here, and if black defends it by g6, there is this beautiful move, queen takes d5, and after black recaptures the knight, there is this knight f6 check, king somewhere, knight takes queen back, and white remains with the white has won a piece, and he remains with a whole rook up with totally winning position. Okay, so black is forced to let h5 go, and I guess he thought he has a great attacking chances here, because again there are some ideas based on the mate on g2, but I guess he probably missed white's next move. Okay, so white took on h5, black took on c3. I think best move here is rook e6, but then after f3, white has only gained a pawn for nothing. So yeah, knight c3, a principled reaction, and here black played excellent move, rook e3. Of course, he cannot take the knight. If he takes the knight, then there is bishop takes queen g2 mate. But he played the excellent move, rook e3. I guess I'm only guessing, but I think that Saric has probably missed this move. The point is that if black takes the knight on e4, there is this rook h3, and we can see here that mate both on h7 and h8 is threatened, and there's nothing black can do. If he goes something like f6, then there is g6 taking away the f7 square for the king, and black is getting mated. He has no time to give mate on his own on g2. The rook e6 is forced, and that's the only move in the position. Planning to meet rook h3 by rook h6, sacrificing another exchange. Of course, white took this rook, and black took with the queen on e4. And here we have a kind of critical position in the game, and as white needs to meet the threat of queen takes g2 checkmate. He has two ways of doing so, and the amazing way to do so would be rook f3. It seems that it's a computer move. Also, it's threatening queen takes f7. So yeah, but it seems that white has gone mad since he's leaving a whole clear exchange. But after the moves queen a1 check, king h2, bishop takes f3, there is this beautiful sequence h7 check, king h8, and queen takes f7, and white is threatening mate on g8, so black's answer is forced. He goes king takes h7, and after queen takes f3, of course, he could go also queen takes f8, I think, but then it's not so clear. So after queen takes f3 and something like knight e2 and queen e4 check, of course this is not totally over, but white would still need to be precise, but it is somewhat easier technical task, and white is better if not winning here. Okay, but Navara played the more human f3, and after this move it is not even clear who is better in this position. It's after queen d4 check, white has problems with the undeveloped pieces on his queen side, and white moved his king on h2, and now knight e2. We can see here that black is threatening mate on g1 and also attacking the rook on a1. And the best move, and practically the only move here, is bishop b2, giving up the bishop but covering the g1 square with the rook. And of course black cannot take this bishop, since after h7, king h8, queen takes f7, he would get mated. There is no check in position. But he can go queen f4 check. Of course, if g3, then black can probably go like this. After this variation, he is mating first. So g3 is out of the question. White played king h1, and here black played c3, winning this piece back. And also you have to notice that queen from f4 is defending the pawn on f7. So okay, c3, h takes g7, bishop takes g7, and queen h7 check. White played this sequence in order for his queen to reach c2. And after king f8, bishop c1, knight takes c1, queen c2, and black played bishop h6 defending the knight. He could have started maybe with bishop c8, but okay, nothing wrong with bishop h6. And here the position is in the state of equilibrium, and it is an unusual material balance, but okay, yeah, I think with the best play it should end in the draw, but of course it's really complicated and hard to play. So white took on c3, black played knight e2, And white is the one who has to be precise and to find some good moves in order to survive. He could go if he goes aggressive by queen c7 here, then after knight g3 check, king g1. Of course, if white takes this knight, then after queen takes the bishop, bishop e3, or maybe he should start with queen h4 check. Then this is mate, so he cannot go for this variation. And after knight g3, king g1, queen d4 check, king h2, knight f5. Of course, not taking the rook because he would get mated here, and it would be stupid. But knight f5 is dangerous for white. And if, for instance, if he takes the bishop, then there is bishop f4 check, g3, queen b2 check, king h1, queen takes a1 check. So yeah, a lot of possibilities, a lot of tactics that favor black, and white needs to be careful. And white played the good move queen e1, intending queen h4 and exchanging queens. Black played knight d4, and here he's threatening the sacrifice on f3. For instance, if white makes some move a4, then he can take on f3, and after black recaptures, bishop takes f3 check, and here every variation favors black. It's completely correct sacrifice of the knight, and I will leave to the viewers, it would be nice practice to try and calculate all the possible defenses by white and the winning lines by black. So yeah, I will not analyze that in detail here. Okay, so queen h6, and this is forcing the exchange of the queens, since also this bishop on h6 is threatened. And after taking the queens and king g7, now we have gone into endgame with very unusual material balance. And again, I think black is slightly better, but with correct play it should end in a draw. So rook d1, knight f5, and here white, I don't know whether it's nurse or something, but he went wrong and he gave up the exchange. I don't know why with rook takes h6. He could have gone, I don't know, rook g4, king f6, and rook c4, and now of course knight e3 is not possible because of the check. So yeah, that's one possibility. He could also go rook h3, and so nothing terrible is immediately apparent for him. Although it is a bit unpleasant, but there's no reason for panic. I think this is somewhat panic move. Okay, rook takes h6, king takes h6, and now rook c1, the only chance, utilizing the c file, because if he tries to bring the king, then after knight d4, king f2, bishop c6, c6, there is no open file for white, and this is a much better version for black than the one that happened in the game. So okay, rook c1, and here black missed his best chance. He could have gone d5. This is very nice move, because if white goes for the bishop with rook c7, then black can ignore that and play d4, and after white takes d3, and this pawn is promoting, since after rook d7, knight d4, black knight prevents white from taking the pawn, and this pawn will queen, and that is how my favorite commentator Yasser Seirawan would say, "Oh, she wrote." Yeah, okay, but black missed that, and he played e4, and after the forced recapture, we see here that this pawn, now it's much harder to advance. He's not supported by e5, and white can create his own boss pawn on the queen side, as was foreseen when white first played the move b4. Okay, so after further moves which centralize the kings, king g1, king g5, white went to create his own pass pawn, a4, black pushed his own pass pawn by d5, now rook c7, king forces king f6, if black tries to keep the king on the more visually more active square g5 in order for him to trying to reach f4 by f6, then after b5, ab, d4, b6, knight d6, rook d7, the king cannot defend this knight, and black is, I don't know, even worse, and white draws without any trouble here. Okay, so king f6, and now if white goes after this a pawn, it is dangerous, because after d4 rook takes a6, king e5, rook is a7, d3, king f2 and king d4, and this sequence black is pawn is queening, and white has to be careful. Okay, white's pawn is also queening, but he has to give up his rook and play this lost endgame with a piece down. Okay, so b5, most logical, creating the pass pawn as fast as possible. And after black took and white captures, d4, b6, knight d6. Here, of course, rook d7 has no point, because after king e6, rook has to move again. But here, white played very amazing move g4. And at first, when I saw this move, I found it extremely hard to understand, because it's really counterintuitive. But black's idea here is to bring the king to d5, to d5. First play bishop b7, bring the king to d5, and then play bishop c6 and king c5. And if white merely moves his rook, he will do so unhindered, and he will win this pawn for free. But with this move, with the g pawn, if he advances it, he will be able to recapture it, and then this endgame will be drawn, as we will see in the variations. For instance, if white goes king f2, king h6, g3, just removing the pawn, and then bishop b7, king e2, and if he lets black to go with his plan unhindered after some king moves, we can see here that if white hasn't lost time on g3, g4, and his pawn was already on g5, then he could have played g6, and it would defend the pawn, and it would be drawn endgame, and here black is just winning. And we'll see, I will show the variation in which the different tells g4, king e6, centralizing the king, and g5 here. And of course, if king f2, bishop e7, g5, and if black goes the same as in the variation before, by king d5, king e2, bishop c6, intending king c5, then after king d2, king c5, b7, knight b7 is fourth, rook takes f7, knight d6, g6, here this position is probably drawn, because of the advanced g pawn. So yeah, this variation is the whole idea behind g4, and I think it proves that the most very important thing in the endgame is also to calculate, and that is something that a lot of players ignore, and they just play by the feeling, including the author of this video. And yeah, so g5, bishop d5, it is anticipating the move king f2 and intending to play knight e4 check, attacking the king, attacking the pawn. But white plays it anyway. If white goes king f1 instead, avoiding knight e4, then d3, and here white can't play the move king e3 as he could when his king is on f2. Then after king e1, king e5, rook d7, knight b7, king d2, king d4, black is probably winning here. So king f2, knight e4 check, king e2, very good, because if black takes on g5, b7, this endgame is drawn. So king d6 and g6, very good move, exchanging the g pawns and remaining in a draw endgame. For instance, if white would go rook c8 and I know bishop c6, king d3, king d5, and this is much more unpleasant for him. So yeah, g6 only way, an excellent resource. And after white takes rook g7, we see that now there is no way for black to both to defend this pawn and to control this b pawn. For instance, if he goes something like knight here, king somewhere, and this move, then this is even, I don't know, it's okay, it's still drawn by b7, and this is a drawn position, I think. Okay, so black played knight c5, white took, and bishop e6, and this position should be a draw, but yet miracles still happen, and if white managed to lose this position, this gives a hope for all us patzers, because even elite players such as Navara can go astray and can be influenced by their nerves or tiredness or long play or I don't know by what. So let's see how it went. b7. Of course, if black takes this pawn, then after king d3, king d5, rook g5, king d6, white takes with a draw. So yeah, king c7, the only try, but and after rook g7, okay, if white played rook g5, knight takes, king d3, he would take the pawn on d4 and draw immediately. Okay, but he played rook g7, king b8, rook e7. Here also rook g5, knight e4, rook g7 would be a draw. So he played rook e7, and after bishop g4, king d2, bishop f5, he played rook e8, the losing move. I don't know what would have happened if he played just rook f7, bishop g6, rook e7. How would black intend to win this? I think it's not possible. Okay, but rook e8 check gives up this b pawn for free and lets black king join the play. And after king takes b7, rook e5, I've guessed that he has missed the move knight b3 and the fact that white king has to go away and that black is in time to consolidate his position with an extra pawn and a winning position. So yeah, if king e2, bishop c2, now black is technically winning. And after rook d5, king c7, king f3, king c6, rook d8, king b5, he starts to bring his king. Very instructive for all club players. King f4, king b4, rook b8, king c3, rook c8, king d2. Here, black is completely winning. And if, I don't know, he's activated his king, and here rook d8, d3, if now white tries something like king e4, king e2, this pawn is queening. So it's not completely winning. But white tried rook takes d3, and I think this is really interesting decision because it is also kind of moral question whether it is legit or not to test your opponent to mate you with bishop and knight. Some people have told me that they consider this bad manners and it's impolite, but I think that if even on grandmaster level players are challenging each other, that it is not a sin for us club players to do so. And also there are some grandmasters who have failed to mate with the bishop and knight. I think this was Anna Ushenina and I don't know who, I think it was Vladimir Epishin or his opponent, I can't remember. So yeah, very strong players have forgotten or never learned actually the technique of mating with bishop and knight. So I think it's definitely worth it to try this against some of your opponents in order to salvage half a point. So we will just briefly look how it's done. So first we need to draw to bring the king to the corner by cornering pieces. I will skip that briefly. We can see here that white is heading towards the edge of the board, and that is the edge which is opposite cover to the cover of black bishop. So he's heading toward h8 square, and after king a5, king f7, bishop f5, king g7, king e6, king g8. Of course, white could have put some probably a more resilient defense, but anyway, king f6, king h8, knight d3, king g8, knight e5, king h8, knight f7, check, king g8. We have reached the critical position here, and here black should move the bishop away by place it on any square, and after king f8, bishop h7, forcing the king away from the corner. And although I have analyzed many possibilities and many techniques by white, I want to show the main line here, and the maneuver that any club players should probably know. Although I have never properly studied this endgame myself, and I've been playing tournament chess for the last 5 years, and I have never been even close to reach the position in which I should mate with bishop and knight. So it is disputable whether it pays off to study this thing instead of, I don't know, some opening or anything or tactics. But yeah, okay, when once you encounter it and you fail to do it, you go home pretty ashamed, and yeah, but okay. I don't think the people are creating too much fuss about mating with bishop and knight when most players don't ever encounter it in their lives. Okay, so yeah, king e8, and here black should do the so-called V maneuver by the knight by playing knight e5, preventing the king move knight d7. Of course, white can go back to the corner, but it is much easier. The most resilient way is king d8, and here after king e6, king c7, knight d7. Here, actually, in the actual game here, white resigned. He didn't test black's knowledge any further, but we can see what would have happened after bishop c6. There is this maneuver bishop d3, and we can see here that this takes the square b5 from the white knight, and white's king is controlled, and he cannot leave this box here because a5 square is really far away, and there's no way he can reach it. So all that remains here now is to bring the king closer, and now after knight c5, of course, white has a choice, but if he goes, for instance, king d8, then knight e6, and he again has to run towards this square because on king e8, bishop g6 is immediate mate, so king c8, bishop h6 check, king b8, king c6, king a7, knight c5, king a8, king b6, king b8, knight d7, king a8, bishop b7. This is the one possible mating picture. Okay, and after king b8, bishop a6, king a7, king c6, we can see here that white king cannot go anywhere. He has only squares b8, a8, and a7, king b8, king b6. Now he has to move between b8 and a8, and after king a8, bishop b7 check, king b8, knight a6 check mate, and the game is over. Okay, that's everything for this video. It did turn out to be very long indeed, probably longer than it should have been. Yeah, so apologies for that. I wanted to cover as much as possible, and as usual I got carried away. Yeah, if any one of you has managed to endure until the very end, thank you very much for that. Thank you for watching, and see you all in the future. And good luck with your chess and your life in general. So thank you for everything, and bye.